everyone. Welcome back to Infernal Intercourse. I'm Marilla Sands, and I'm joined by Pastor Brian again. Today we're going to talk about the importance of names in Lucifer and also in real life. So I'll throw it over to Brian, as I usually do, for some initial thoughts.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. It's been a while, as I have been adjusting in my ministry and life to the new the new normal for a while. So it's really good to be back here with you all, and this is exciting. And also, I feel excited because like a new season's going to come eventually, right? So it's and press releases are kind of coming every once in a while, so that's exciting. And as we're going to discuss today, I guess I should say, my name is Brian, and my pronouns are he and him. And I guess we'll see later why I should always say that, but why that's important today.
Okay. So I'm going to show a clip. I'll insert it here.
So you're the devil?
Yes. Well, Satan, Beelzebub, Old Scratch. Actually, I like that one in particular. But those were the old me. These days, you just have plain old Lucifer.
And often our feelings of loss connect to how we feel about who we are.
Oh, right. So we're back on that, are we? You want to talk about my identity?
Yes, because you're the devil. You told me your names, but you left out a few others. Abaddon, Belial, Prince of Darkness.
Someone's been brushing up on their Sunday school.
Yes, but before you fell, you were known as Samael, the light bringer.
I don't go by that name anymore. Detective Douche, how dare you subject me to this pathetic caricature?
You have the nerve to stand there and accuse me of making fun of you after everything you've done in the last couple of days. Hell, ever since we first met.
Detective Douche.
Dan. My name is Dan. Or Detective Espinoza.
Right. Dan.
All right, now that you've seen the clip, a couple of names get mentioned there. This is from the second episode. The first part's from the second episode of the first season, and I believe the second part is from episode 5 or 6. And so in the first clip, we see him with Linda, and they're discussing various names that he's gone by. And he mentions he doesn't go by Satan, and he just wants to be called Lucifer. And then later we have her calling him Samael because Amenadiela set her up to do that, and that makes Lucifer angry. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the names that he brings up and what they mean literally, and then we'll go from there. So one of the names that Linda mentions is Belial. When I looked that up, that basically means having little value or no worth. I don't think she mentions Beelzebub, but we did maybe mention that earlier in one of our episodes because that was a Canaanite god whose name means basically ball of the exalted house. So you've got a ball reference, which I think he's referenced himself as Beelzebub once or twice, just not in these clips. So also she says Abaddon, which means destruction. I believe that's a Greek name. Then the devil, more of a title, apparently goes back and just means the Slanderer. So I would think he wouldn't like that one, since our character of Lucifer is really not about lying. But maybe he doesn't really go with what it really means. I mean, sometimes they haven't really translated these things the way they kind of should be translated, like Samael, which they have translated as light bringer, and it actually means venom of God. And the thing that people don't agree on, is it God that sends out Samael to spread plague, or is it the devil that sends out Samael to spread plague? But spreading plague around apparently is his job. Satan means the adversary. You see him in the first chapter of Job, in case you want to kind of see what the Jewish writers thought about that character. But of course, come back to Lucifer, which if you talk about it strictly what it means, it is light bringer. But glossing it more the way it's meant, apparently it means more like Venus, the morning star. So a dawn bringer, or the beginning of light kind of thing. So they used it in the show as something that Lucifer is supposed to be the light bringer in the sense of the flaming sword in the second season. But really it's more like Venus, the dawn star kind of thing, which in the Bible, in the New Testament, when it comes up, it references Christ. And in the one time in the Old Testament it pops up, it references the king of Babylon. So weirdly enough, in the Bible itself, you don't see the term Lucifer referring to Satan. So this has been something since the Bible was written that's kind of glommed onto that character.
Well, and just the idea, the Bible's written in, Aramaic, Koine, and Hebrew, and Lucifer is not from any of those languages.
Right. So probably good old St. Jerome there in his Holy
Yeah.
Bible was doing a lot of things. And I can never say St. Jerome without thinking of Ghostbusters, when the library. He's like, my uncle thought he was St. Jerome. But yeah, so that is a Latin term. So you get a lot of different languages getting kind of mishmashed up on some of these names. But then Lucifer comes out and says, I go by Lucifer, so he wants to be called that. And basically people respond to that and respect that in the show. So he is referred to as Lucifer by everyone else. So, but one other point we want to bring up is that Lucifer then turns around and doesn't issue the same respect to Dan. So he gets to be Officer Douche, various other appellations that aren't very nice. So I'll throw it back over to Brian now that I've pontificated a bit on your thoughts on these names.
Yeah, well, and again, I just want to draw that. It's obvious in what you said, but so the idea that they say Samael means light bringer or whatever, and then he reacts to that. But we're going to talk about it, I think, because there's more that implies about when he was called that or why he's not called that, etc. But I do think that's ironic. Like, okay, well, I'm going to go by light bringer, but I don't use light bringer on purpose, right? Like, it's just weird. I mean, it's just Hebrew or Latin. Anael, by the way, just means like Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, like of God or like God. Like it's connecting it to God. And it is interesting. Angels always in Babylonian or all kinds of traditions, they interchange in the Hebrew Bible, particularly all the time. First they'll say there was a man, then they'll say there was a God, there was an angel, then they'll say it was God. So they do kind of mix that up. And I don't think it means because they didn't separate the two, but I mean, I just think it's interesting that the languages, and also in the Bible, when they say angel, whether it's in the Greek or the Hebrew, it's literally the same word as messenger. So you have to figure out by the context. And so that's why when they add these other titles to it, it kind of helps us. But I think that goes to the other point I want to make, which is like, most of this is extra biblical, right? Mythology. And so even though we can go back to the Bible and point at certain things, it would be my contention that no one who ever wrote the Bible and the early readers of the Bible and the people who passed down the stories, like they never meant us to take, for example, that dialogue in Job, which Job is a fascinating book, but it's a lesson, right? It's not meant to be the daily news. It's not like a historical representation of what happens in heaven, right? So, and you and I both said before, I don't know the canon, the comic book canon, or the graphic novel canon of this. But even within Christian canon, like when you get to people like me, we don't, I'll be honest, I believe maybe in some dark energies or, maybe there's some energy memories that are spirits or things like that. I won't dismiss that. But this idea that there's a devil in hell who guards us, I don't believe in hell. And the idea that there's like this particular being who is sitting on my shoulder trying to influence me toward evil. I mean, I would say what we attribute to the devil is simply part of life and simply part of the hurts that we accumulate in life and then manifest themselves, right? So to me, if there's a hell, we build it on earth with our own dysfunction, right? So I just think it's important to get this out of the realm of trying to discern the truth, right? Because this is all mythology to me, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, we don't really see this Lucifer character in the Bible per se. We do see an adversary in the first chapter of Job. We do see someone tempt Christ, but this pitchforked character with the cloven hooves kind of thing is really, I think, much more of the wild man trope, and I actually want to do a lot more with the wild man stuff and talk about that in a different episode. because that's fascinating to me. I mean, the earliest piece of literature we have with Gilgamesh, there's a wild man right there, an Enkidu. So it's like this was a trope even before people were writing things down. We're still using it. I mean, the Incredible Hulk is another wild man, and yet, you know, it's this really standard kind of character who exists on the margins and isn't necessarily very good, at least in the beginning. So, but
I do think there's a connection.
So.
Before we go into Wild Man, I do think there's a connection I should have mentioned when we talk about Lightbringer or Morningstar, or even Accuser. But like, there is an extra biblical tradition in the West that they call, you know, and they allude to it here, that Satan was the apple of God's eye, right? That it was the closest to God, God's favorite. I'm not used to calling angels God's children in any way that's like uniquely he's my daddy, but nonetheless, just the idea that he was the brightest, he was the one with the most promise, right? And of course, that's why he would challenge God, and then it fits into what's said here, and that God punishes him for that, right? I mean, that is some extra biblical tradition that I know in the West, anyway. And as you say, it's in the East probably too.
So yeah, I want to talk about the Wild Man in a different episode, because there's a lot to unpack with that. So look for that one coming up later. But for now, we're talking about names. So now we've kind of gone over some of the names that they use on the show, and Lucifer's reaction to hearing those names. But names are very important, right? Because they tell you something about who you are. They identify you. There's something that's just caught up with your whole self-image, right? Your psychology. So names are very important, and what people are called is very important.
I think that's so funny because, I was Catholic most of my life, and I have a middle name, Anthony, right, Antonio, and that was given to me, and I always loved that name. I hated Brian. Growing up. It just didn't, I don't know, it just didn't fit. It didn't feel like it fit. I mean, it still really doesn't. I still identify to Antonio more than I identify to Brian. But I stopped hating Brian when I found out it means noble strength. And I'll be honest, it's only recently that I said this before, I'm not an Anglophobe, but I'm not an Anglophile either, right? And so even like Celtic roots, I really haven't done a lot with that. I spent a lot more time looking at indigenous cultures of the Western Hemisphere. And so as I embrace Celtic culture more, Brian is less and less odious to me. But we picked a confirmation name, so I got to pick that myself. And like a typical 13-year-old boy, where I came from, I was trying to make my initials look good. So I was already BAS, and which BS is the good initial for me, and that's just my basic initial. But I was BAS, and so I either wanted Stephen or Michael. So I'd either be Bass or Bass, or I'd be Bams. And because Bam Bam was one of my little nicknames, I went ahead with Michael. So it was a totally stupid reason. But then I went through some difficult times I went into like 20 years of survival mode. And I just feel like that was the positive energy of the universe that I would call God, kind of giving me that Michael protection energy, because that's St. Michael's role, right? To protect us from evil and to protect us and preserve us. So it is interesting. I had the agency to choose. At the time, I was kind of blowing it off, but it ended up being useful to me. So that's kind of how I come at this, where names are important.
Okay. So on the show, we've had people respecting Lucifer, but Lucifer not necessarily respecting Dan in return. So I'm pretty sure that Dan's always referred to Lucifer as Lucifer. So it hasn't necessarily gone the other way. But you get that disrespect from Lucifer toward Dan. So thoughts on that?
I think Dan's been dismissive, maybe not in explicit words, but I think he's been disrespectful at times, but not with name calling.
So that is also then what we want to get to, is that people today are choosing names for themselves that aren't necessarily the names that their parents chose for them, and what that means to them and what that means to society at large. And are people adapting to that or accepting of that or not? So thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny because we've talked before about Lucifer sounding like a pre-adolescent. And, that's good development, we have to rebel and separate ourselves from our parents, who are the ones who named us, and then I think some of us reintegrate and can find our identity and value in what was assigned to us, and others of us maybe need to change that as part of our growth and development. And of course, to what we've kind of alluded to, the whole idea that people of transgender experience or who are genderqueer, they were assigned a certain gender, but at some point they realize that just doesn't represent who they are. And I would say that's not who they know God as, and I would say who God knows them as. And so they're on a journey to discover who they are in relationship with God. And I think Lucifer's on very much a similar journey, right? Like, who is Lucifer in relation? And very much that adolescent, resentment to daddy,
And we should find out more about that now in season 5, where Dennis Haysbert is going to show up as God. And now we just had a couple of days ago the news that Samael is signed for season 6. It'll be interesting because for a year or more they known they were only going to have one more season. So supposedly the last episode of the season 5 is named something like The Final Fight with Dad or something like that. So you'd think that they're actually going to have this. They've already even filmed the knockdown, drag out Lucifer versus Dad thing. What do you do for season 6, right? So we'll have to see how they decide to handle that. The actually having God on stage, because as we discussed before, God doesn't seem like such a good guy. So
from the eyes of his pre-adolescent child. But no, you're right, and other people testify to it though too.
Well, I was saying we talked a bit before where apparently you make one mistake, you end up in hell forever, right? So Lucifer does something that ticks off God, and he's apparently sent off to hell for eternity. People apparently get sent off to hell for eternity. Personally, I think it would be really cool if Linda and a few other therapists went down there and went into everybody's little hell loops and got them to be self-aware and to atone, and then maybe they could empty hell out eventually. So that would be interesting to me as a story. But God seems pretty much you make one mistake, that's it for eternity, which literally would be like trillions and trillions of years, and so that's pretty harsh. And there doesn't seem to be any recourse, And heaven seems to be occupied with a lot of adolescents in the form of angels who are not self-aware and don't really have any accomplishments or adultness. They don't know how to adult. So it's just a weird setup, I guess.
I think it's interesting. That reminds me, I always say that the angels kind of act like the way Greek gods did or whatever, and but that also makes me think, as we think about names, cross-pollination. And of course, the 3 Abrahamic religions are in the Levant, like right where Asia, Africa, and Europe come together. So I do think that provides a richness, I guess, that, because right away, like you thought of Inkundu, that creates a lot of context. And I think that's hard, knowing that they have created their own universe. I've recently been looking at the Clone Wars cartoon TV show or whatever,
Okay.
and there's huge, important canon developments in there that just I've never paid attention to, right? But so the whole universe has a lot more integrity to it, and I wonder how much the graphic novel universe of this story uses common knowledge that we allude to, and how much it creates its own alternative to that.
I do like that Lucifer mentions that he does like some of the folklore names, because she mentions things like Old Scratch, and there are a lot of names like that, Dickens and Old Nick and various names that mean the devil but aren't out of Greek or Latin or something. And he says something like, I always like that one when she says Old Scratch. So he has some fondness for some of the folklore parts.
Well, I'm even thinking of Kabuki theater, right? There's a character that a Westerner is going to read as the devil, not that it's necessarily how Eastern folks are looking at that, but I do think that's interesting. Why do you think he reacts like he is struck by Samael?
I don't really know, unless it's. And part of my problem, I think, is that we've never been told, maybe we will now, what he did that ticked God off. Okay, because every time his mother or his brother say something, it's like, well, you led a rebellion, and yet he is the only angel who gets kicked out of heaven, right? Because he mentions being, alone in hell in terms of angel kind, anyway. And apparently God set up that an angel has to rule hell. Okay, so there is an angel in hell, and that angel is there because he did tried to have a rebellion. But a rebellion with just one person isn't a rebellion. So what was it really? We haven't been told, and so I think without knowing what he did or what God did to make him mad enough to then make God mad back. I don't know. Maybe that's part of this whole Samael thing, where that's the name I used back when, before I got mad at Dad, before this all went to crap. And now that Dad's gotten mad at me, I don't want to use that name that Dad gave me anymore. Something like that. Your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because I don't think, in what we've explored so much about this series, I don't think it's an idea, which could work, but I don't think it fits in this universe. The idea that Jesus kind of stole his identity, right? But that would fit, but I don't think it fits in this universe.
And we have only had one mention of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that was when the bad guy in episode 1 of season 4 just says something like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And then Lucifer says something like, well, not hardly, or something. But that's been it. So we've carefully stayed away from any discussion of that. And
I don't think it impacts his character. Yeah, it just feels like a choice they've made that it doesn't impact this mythology. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But my other thought is, if hell is self-imposed, is he the only one that still chooses this self-flagellation? Because there are ways that he chooses suffering over and over and over again, right? And we've remarked before that he started to do better and then kind of had a regression. So I wonder if he's the only one in hell because it's what he needs, right? Or what he won't let go of. And I also wonder if there were other angels involved or other heavenly beings at all. Maybe they've repented, or we really don't use much repentance language in this series either. But so to me, I tend to think, he's the only one that's still holding on to whatever it is that keeps him in hell.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to the idea that maybe he's there because God wants him to figure out some things, because he's still the favorite and God wants him to be better or be more. Because if we see him develop with Linda and becoming more self-aware, unlike all the others, and it's like, and God, although M.Div was like, you have to go back to hell back at the first part of the season 1. Apparently, they've given that up, and it's clearly he's just going to stay in Los Angeles for a while. So if God's kind of like, yeah, let him stay in Los Angeles for a bit, maybe he wants him talking with Linda. Maybe he wants a self-aware angel. If so, then why?
I don't think this series wants God to be irredeemable, although I think it's highly critical. So to me, it seems if Lucifer is trapped in a loop, it's because he's choosing it, not necessarily that God has chosen it for him. But that I could just be unable to escape my own, my own beliefs, I guess, really.
Well, I kind of wonder that even if I'm right on this, and God has been send him to hell for so that he could learn something or whatever, that he's also frustrated that he should have learned it a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that some of this getting stuck in hell and was like, no, you really weren't supposed to sit there in the mud that long, dude. Maybe I was hoping that you had you're my favorite, you're the smartest or whatever, you're the most capable. A few thousand years ago, you should have figured this out or something.
Yeah, at a certain point, I fire a sponsee, right? If they keep choosing suffering, right, over and over and over, at a certain point, I fire them and say, not only do I can't stay sober with this ridiculousness, but obviously what I'm doing isn't working. Well, if you're God, there's no backup you're kind of stuck trying to find new ways, which I think you're onto something with. Of course, he's God. I hate to say God is allowing LA, right? So maybe it is God's like, well, you're onto something. Hold on to it. Maybe it'll finally bring you out of this loop, you know?
Yeah, that's why I have this hope for his time with Linda as being maybe the push that gets him to grow up to the point where he can be more on an equal footing with his father. Not necessarily equal because, God, but more on an equal footing when not so much the pre-adolescent with their daddy issues.
Which explains the supernatural effects to her, right? Like, clearly there's some divine purpose going on with these people in Lucifer's life, right? Mm-hmm. So it does feel like it's not independent of God, right? God's not only allowing it, but God has set up, right, this, at least some of this circumstances.
So, but back to names. Do we have anything else to discuss on names?
Well, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about that conversation with Lucifer and Daniel. Just because, again, highlighting that disrespect. And we've talked before about a lot of issues this series does well, about what I would call intersectionality, that is a fairly really new consciousness in our society, and that some of us are struggling to get better at, and some of us are trying to run away from. But the series does pretty good, not on every front, but just that idea again of names being part of dignity, part of agency, part of respect, part of safety. Really, if someone refuses to call you your name that you're asking them to call you, or more so if they call you an insult, it's not a safe situation, right? So I think that's a great conversation about that. But then, unfortunately, well, and again, douche is to me a misogynistic way to, for one man to call another man, right? I won't speak for women, but so I had hope there that, okay, well, we're going to deal with this. The context of name calling is wrong. It's very pre-adolescent, but also we're doing it in a way that degrades women. But then they resolve their little thing there, and then, but it's kind of unresolved about the fact that they're still using degrading to women, kind of, and even their little broness there to me feels almost like a little bit like, do the writers intend this to be insensitive to women? And of course, I'm not a woman, so I'm doing a lot of talking about women. But to me, as someone who's trying to be an ally and who's trying to be on guard for that, it felt kind of off to me. So I'm curious about what you thought.
I hadn't really thought about it, actually. So.
Okay. Well, and then the other thing about it that I thought was significant was, I don't know if he ever calls him douche again. I think he does.
I think he stops for a while, but by somewhere, because in season 3, they really take the character back a bit. Then you get this whole Cain, Lucifer thing that was really kind of tedious. But I think by season 4, Dan has moved his desk away, right? He's traded desks with somebody else. He doesn't have to be anywhere near Lucifer. He's gone back to saying things like, you're really irresponsible. I don't like you. Stay away from me. And I think that at that point, douche comes out again a few times. So
I also just think in general, I feel like Dan has a bigger role, but that has not been realized, and I'm wondering if it's going to come into play at any point, right? That either as a negative or positive, I tend to feel like it's setting them up to be have a positive impact at some point. Maybe that's still coming, but I don't know. For me, and not just in this episode, but it bothered me the whole series, this idea that Dan was the foil. And again, maybe it's because you and I talked about integrity of characters, and maybe at trying to get a cheap joke, or maybe trying to spice up the plot. Maybe that's why they include that. It doesn't feel like it fits to me, I guess, is the main thing.
Yeah, I don't know if they know what they want to do with Dan sometimes. Yeah. He starts off as a bad cop, a dirty cop. He kind of gets over that. He becomes a better cop. a better father. He starts showing up for Taco Thursdays or whatever it is that they do again. And but then you get by season 4, or at the end of season 3, his badness comes to the play where he's like, well, I was a dirty cop. I know how to do this. And he's able to help them find Cain and confront him. And he does a few other things like with Mazikeen, and they go beat some people up when he really shouldn't have done that. So he does seem to have this darker underside that he occasionally lets out, but then he feels bad about it and pulls back again. So it's like they're trying to make him a little more multidimensional, but then it's like, well, we don't really have time because really the show is Chloe and Lucifer more, and so everyone else has got to kind of glom onto their storyline. So it just may be that he doesn't get as much time to develop as they would like.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the police shows, which are ubiquitous, done to death actually, and they all tend to explain away bad behavior or else avoid it altogether. When, let's face it, I think everybody would agree it's at least something that every department deals with, right? So I would think it would be a good thing to explore bad cops, let's just say, and I feel like maybe they keep worrying about making Daniel, like he's too close to the story to make him one of the bad cops, right? So I don't know, that maybe that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like, all right, let's represent a bad cop and let it either be Daniel or not, right? And of course we had the commander who turned out to be Cain, but that's a whole other story. I don't think that was, again, an honest look at the difficulties police face with corruption.
He's got to be a serial killer who only pretends
Right.
to be a cop, basically. Yeah.
And he's an immortal, all that stuff.
Yeah. All right. So, is that your final thoughts, or anything else that you were?
I think we've explored a lot about names. I think we did pretty good.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us again. And if you liked it, hit the subscribe button and the little bell notifications so you know when I put up more videos. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.